Intuition, the Power and Role of Our Natural Instincts. By Celestia Copps. Read for you by Chloe Jacobson. Chapter 1. The Top 8 Realities About Intuition. The fact that we hack together machines to beat us in a bunch of small corners of our own game proves, if nothing else, we can hack our own intuitions also. 1. Intuition is highly efficient. You don't consider it too much. A body of research exposes that intuition can be not only faster than reflection, but also more accurate. We're pretty good at judging people based on impressions. Thin slices of experience varying from peek of a photo to 5-minute interaction, and consideration cannot be only extraneous but intrusive. In one case study of the capability she dubbed thin slicing, the late psychologist Nalini Ambady asked individuals to watch quiet 10-second videos of teachers and to rate the trainer's overall efficiency. Their rankings correlated highly with students' end-of-semester ratings. Another set of individuals had to count backwards from 1,000 by nines as they watched the clips, inhabiting their conscious working memory. Their ratings were just as accurate, showing the instinctual nature of the social processing. Seriously, another group was asked to spend a minute documenting reasons for their judgment before giving the ranking. Precision dropped considerably. Ambady presumed that deliberation focused them on vivid but misleading hints, like certain gestures or utterances, instead of letting the complicated interaction of subtle signals from a holistic impression. She found similar disturbance when participants watched 15-second clips of sets of people and judged whether they were complete strangers, good friends, or dating partners. Other research shows we're better at identifying deception and sexual preference from thin slices when we depend on intuition rather than reflection. It's just as if you are driving a standard transference, says Judith Hall, a psychologist at Northeastern University. And if you start thinking about it too much, you can't remember what you're doing. However, if you go on automatic pilot, you're fine. Much of our social life is a lot like that. Thinking way too much can also harm our ability to form preferences. College students' ratings of strawberry jams and college courses aligned better with specialist viewpoints when the students weren't asked to analyze their rationale. And people made car buying choices that were both objectively better and more personally satisfying when asked to concentrate on their feelings instead of on details. But only if the choice was complicated, when they had a lot of info to process. Intuition's unique powers are unleashed only in certain circumstances. In one study, individuals finished a battery of 8 tasks, including 4 that tapped reflective thinking, discerning rules, comprehending vocabulary, and 4 that tapped intuition and creativeness, creating new products or figures of speech. Then, they ranked the degree to which they had used intuition, suspicions, inklings, my heart. Use of their gut hurt their performance on the first 4 tasks, as expected, and helped them on the rest. At times, the heart is smarter than the head. 2. We get too deeply attached to instinctual beliefs. Once an instinct hits, we hold on to it in spite of the dangers. Intuition can, for example, result in all sorts of cognitive and social predispositions, like the anchoring effect, where choices are swayed by the first piece of info thrown at us, and racial bias. Even in areas where the heart should rule, like romance, it can be unaware. In a classic study, when guys on a bridge were halted by an appealing woman and asked to finish a survey, they were more likely to try and call her afterwards if it was a creepy suspension bridge. Misattributing psychological stimulation to sexual attraction. Our dreams, those unwilled versions of the night, hold a powerful aura of truth we cannot quite snuff out. Many people report they're more likely to change their travel plans if they've dreamed about a plane crash than if the government announced an actual travel caution. And test takers can't shake the first instinct fallacy. 3 in 4 university students reported that when reconsidering a response on a test, their initial choice will generally end up being right. But when we eliminate marks on an actual exam were evaluated, the reverse was true. Twice as many changed answers went from wrong to right as right to wrong. In general, says psychologist Sasha Topolinsky of the University of Perfume in Germany, intuition is something psychological that makes you confident in an idea. You can't eliminate this feeling from me. I do not trust this automobile seller. I can't tell you why, but I'm positive that I don't like him. Intuition about the precision of an instinct is a lot more fallible. When people were asked to rate their self-confidence that their suspicions had guided them masterfully on a test, self-confidence scores had no relationship to actual efficiency. Even when we acknowledge the illogicality of an instinct, we typically stick with it. Consider superstitious notions. I'm an atheist who knocks on wood while knowing it's rubbish. When an instinct catches attention and activates feelings, it could be especially hard to shake, says Jane Risen, a psychologist at the University of Chicago. She calls maintaining beliefs we know to be incorrect acquiescing to intuition. Intuition could not be magic, but we are really under its spell. 3. Intuition can be improved with practice. To have good intuitions in any domain needs a lot of practice. But not all domains are amenable to good instincts. First, there must be regularities connecting events and results. The domain must have high validity. Gary Klein, a psychologist at the Washington, D.C., speaking with firm Macrocognition, has long explored the role of wisdom in the intuition of professionals, such as fire commanders, who can seize up a burning structure quickly. Fires follow the laws of physics, says Klein. The worldwide economy is considerably more chaotic, preventing predictability. As Gigerenzer notes, 5 years before the 2007 real estate crisis, the president of the American Economic Association said, macroeconomics has been successful. Its central issue of depression prevention has been solved. Whether you should trust your emotions should hinge not on the strength of those feelings, we have poor intuitions about intuitions, but on the structure of the domain that you are running in. Look outward, not inward. Second, you need clear feedback to develop your intuitive choices. A review of the literature shows that weather forecasters, test pilots, and chess masters had more trusted knowledge than psychologists, admissions officers, and judges. Results in the latter areas are fuzzier and can play out long after you have decided. That goes for much of everyday life as well. You do not do a journal and an Excel file where you write, okay, on October 1, I made this choice or I purchased this product, and so on, Topolinsky says. We lack hard data about what we do. Good instincts in one domain don't ensure good instincts in another. As Gigerenzer puts it, a soccer player who has great instincts about scoring an objective may have intuitions about spending his cash. So there can't be a basic test of intuition. Even with a domain, competence can vary between different sorts of jobs. We can use concentrated thinking to not only train our instinctive knowledge gradually, but to also invite or stay away from instincts in the moment. Metaphors and sketches are outstanding tools to help us reframe problems or see options more obviously. Klein coaches people to consider pre-mortems. When thinking about a plan, imagine from a future vantage point that it failed and think about what failed. This thinking tool makes powerlessness real, intuitive objects rather than abstract and ignorable hypotheses. Thinker Daniel Dennett of Tufts University has coined the term intuition pumps for thought experiments meant to reframe problems. But he notes that they can be used for good or for evil. One should learn how simple it is to build fake intuition pumps that will provoke fist-pounding intuitions that aren't worth your allegiance, Dennett says. But also, intuition pumps can help you out of imagination blockades. Caution is advised. The role of deliberation in refining impulses and knowing when to trust them shows reflection's close cooperation with intuition. In both its development and release, our reflective deliberation scaffolds off our intuition. But it goes both ways, says psychologist Gordon Pennycook of the University of Regina in Canada. We also tend to use them in tandem. For intuition is picking up, insight is seeing. Intuition is closely related to another word, insight. At times, the two are conflated, which is comprehensive. Both connect to ideas emerging from subconscious processes, offering guidance and hiding their tracks. But they're essentially different. Insight is all about seeing, says Eugene Sadler Smith, a management scholar at Surrey Business School in England. You can articulate the solution, and you can explain it to another person. Whereas intuition is noticing. We can notice a solution to an issue, or we can notice a choice that we should take. It's a judgment. It's almost like a hypothesis. We do not know whether it's right or wrong until we act on it. According to macrocognition's Gary Klein, intuition is how we use our experience to know how to act. Insight runs in the opposite direction. It's not just drawing on what you know, it's changing what you know. To that end, we at times need to clear intuition out of the way to obtain the sudden options we call insight. Advancements are often counterintuitive. One way to demonstrate the role of habitual obstacles is to look at magic tricks. Illusions work through psychological jujitsu, using our assumptions against us. To find how a trick is done, one should unwind certain mental restrictions, a pretty good strategy for eliciting insights in general. In one study, participants watched videos of 12 magic tricks, and half got a spoken clue directing their attention to a presumption. An example could be this. When the magician appeared to throw a coin from one hand to another before making it disappear, the clue was transfer to other hand. Given such prods to counter their intuition about what they saw, the resolution rate went from 21% to 33%. Intuition's relationship with insight is complex. It can at times suggest when an insight is possible. A common lab test of insight is the Remote Partners Test, RAT, given 3 words like cottage, Swiss, and cake. Can you find a fourth that connects them? In this case, cheese. A variation on this job shows people either a coherent or a random word triad and makes them guess quickly whether it's understandable before inquiring for a resolution. Even in cases where people can't summon the solution, they are better than chance at judging the triad's coherence. Researchers use creative intuition to select which courses to follow towards potential discoveries. This is this idea of picking up the right direction, Sadler Smith says. Like a radar that says, decrease there, but not down there. Nobel laureates have discussed their use of inklings. Michael S. Brown has said, as we did our work, I think we practically felt at times that there were almost a hand directing us. But we tend to have poor intuition about how close we are to an insight. In one research study, individuals were given mathematics and reasoning problems whose options needed either a central insight or a mere grinding, and were asked to estimate their distance from the resolution each 15 seconds. Unlike for the non-insight problems, estimates for insight issues stayed fairly flat until the last aha. In a second study, participants' predictions of whether they'd be able to solve insight problems had no correlation with the truth, as opposed to for routine algebra issues. Topolinsky notes the olden attempt to perform a mathematical task called squaring the circle before it was shown unrealistic in 1882. There were many blind tracks that people followed for centuries, he says. Likewise, Einstein produced his theories of relativity. Then, for the rest of his life, he is concocting a possible theory of every little thing. Such a theory could be out there, but for his capabilities and his time, this was a wrong intuition. 5. Tension prefers intuition. Unhappiness doesn't. Consideration is a luxury. In alarming circumstances, say while being chased by a bear, you don't have the time to weigh all your choices. You follow your first impulse, run, presumably. Anxiety stimulated in any circumstance similarly pushes you towards quick and penny-wise reflexes. If you are truly at risk, that can be useful. If not so, then reflection might be better. One research study looked at the results of tension on decision-making by connecting electrodes to an individual's hands and arbitrarily zapping them. Meanwhile, the poor spirits had to finish analogies by skimming answers one at a time. Butter is to margarine as sugar is to beets, saccharin, honey, lemon, candy, chocolate. Compared to participants who did not get shocks, they were more likely to get on an answer without even seeing all of the alternatives and, consequently, got more wrong. Stress's results on the brain are mediated in part by the release of the hormonal agent cortisol. In one experiment, scientists gave individuals a cortisol-increasing drug, or a placebo, and then had them do something called the Cognitive Reflection Test, CRT. The CRT includes 3 questions, each with an intuitive but wrong answer. For example, a bat and a ball cost $1.10. The bat costs $1 more than the ball. How much does the ball cost? You want to say 10 cents, but a quick calculation reveals the ball is 5 cents and the bat is 105. Most people, even students at elite colleges, struggle to get all 3 issues right, but cortisol minimized right answers even further. Even as tension activates heuristic thinking, practices, and shortcuts, it degrades more sophisticated instinctual processing. Remember the remote partners test? Home Swiss cake? One study found that increasing anxiety in participants by showing them hair-raising pictures scrambled their intuitions about whether linking a word existed. The macabre images may have impacted this efficiency step, called an instinct index, in part by decreasing participants' state of mind. Sadness tends to make people think analytically. When we are sad, something's wrong, which could be time for concentrated problem solving. 6. Some people are more instinctive than others. Some researchers believe there are individual distinctions in broad intuitive ability. A current study found 2 clusters of instinctive skill. One belongs to insight, such as conceiving a new metaphor, which is connected to intelligence. The other, associated with implied learning, or learning complicated info without understanding what you've learned, say getting a new language, is strongly linked to intelligence. Perhaps more substantial for conduct than general instinctual ability is thinking style, the degree to which you rely on intuition and reflection in the first place. A common measure in research is the Faith and Intuition, FI scale, in which people rate contract with statements like, "I believe in trusting my inklings." FI and comparable steps have been linked to some positive qualities. People with high FI get high intuition index scores, as long as they're in a favorable mood, a state that brings intuition out to play. Another scale with items like, "I usually make decisions that feel right to me," correlated with better recognition of social norms, as gauged by how properly people approximated their peers' acceptance of habits like taking and fighting. And another correlated with greater activity on some tasks such as drawing and thinking of uses for a cardboard box. However, people who put faith in intuition also pay a price. They perform even worse on tasks requiring logic. They report having actually experienced more setbacks resulting from poor decisions, ranging from missing a flight to getting separated. They report greater magic thinking, believing in astrology, ghosts, luck, God, and so on. And in one research study, they were more likely to stereotype based on sex, but only in a positive mood. Topolinsky suggests that people may want to seek professions that match their thinking style. An accounting professional will not get as far relying on her gut as would, say, a therapist. And in any occupation, if you know you put great faith in emotions, you might make room for additional reflection on jobs where snap choices can get you into trouble, like getting to the airport. 7. Morality intuitions are quickly swayed. Some of our deepest held beliefs involve morality, how we feel people should behave toward one another. And although they might seem as rock solid as fact, thou shalt not kill, they're just as guided by intuition as anything else. We can reason about lots of them, but only to a point. For many, specifically on controversial or subtle issues like abortion, it comes down to intuition. It just feels wrong or right. Ethical instincts are inescapable and also important, says psychologist Matthew Feinberg of the Rotman School of Management in Toronto. They drive compassion as well as social justice movements, but moral intuitions are also at the heart of many, many problems in society. Impassioned gut reactions can derail logical discussion, as opponents are labeled evil. Many findings highlight the unconscious processing built into ethical judgment. Often, we base viewpoints on things we'd never factor into a deliberate decision. In one study, individuals' approval of sex between cousins depended on whether somebody had secretly released fart spray nearby. Visceral repulsion led to ethical repulsion. In another study, participants were asked whether it was fine to push a pretty large man off a footbridge to block a trolley from killing 5 other individuals. If they just watched a clip from Saturday Night Live versus a documentary, their state of mind was more positive, and they were 4 times as likely to approve. That doesn't seem like reflection, thou shalt not kill, unless you've heard a pretty good joke lately. Obviously, morality is based upon more than short-lived incidental cues. We also have much deeper values like fairness and loyalty. Each an abstraction formed from a lifetime of experience. Psychologist Jonathan Haidt of New York University has marked 5 unique ethical foundations that direct our conduct: fairness, loyalty, authority, pureness, and avoiding damage. Research studies suggest that political liberals prioritize fairness and harm avoidance. Conservatives prefer loyalty, authority, and pureness. And Feinberg has found that we can form people's ethical intuitions by catering messages to their favored values. When he framed an argument for universal health care in regard to purity, fewer diseased Americans versus fairness, health care for all, conservatives expressed more support for Obamacare. When he framed an argument for army spending concerning fairness, fighting inequality, versus authority, American supremacy, liberals uttered more support. Likewise, he swayed conservatives to support same-sex marriage through commitment, patriotic couples, and environmentalism through pureness, a clean planet. He also used moral reframing to lower conservative support for Donald Trump. He disloyally dodged the draft. And liberal support for Hillary Clinton. She unjustly prefers Wall Street. Examples, metaphors, images, and stories can give shape to our own and other people's intuitions, not only in politics, but in all worlds of life, science, relationships, education. We acquire new models of the world and thought, conscious and not, fills them in. As for messages meant to generate gut reactions, we see a lot of that on the internet nowadays, said University of Saskatchewan's Thompson. Memes, that's exactly what they are. One could fairly call memes the fart spray of the web. 8. You can read people by reading what they write online. Humans have strong instincts about others. That's simply because character judgment has such alarming repercussions, and because we have so much experience with it, over our lifetimes and over development. What happens when people reading goes on the internet? And when it's limited to the reading of what others write, increasingly, we should examine each other via bits of text instead of, say, darting eyes or kind smiles, but that doesn't keep back our snap judgments. Normally, when asked to rate a writer's characteristics based on emails, personal essays, streams of consciousness, mock diary entries, mock post, Twitter feeds, and dating ads, readers agree with one another more than chance would allow, showing that there are hints and written reports that dependably trigger our intuitions. Which cues do we use? In dating profiles, studies show swear words suggest high neuroticism and low conscientiousness and agreeableness. Angry words suggest the same in tweets. In personal essays, exaggeration suggests extroversion and openness to experience. Past tense suggests depression in post, and cognitive words like no suggested in journals. Surely consideration plays a vital role in judgments, but I question anyone is counting past tense verbs. Our judgments about qualities from writing samples are also often more precise than chance would allow, as some people are better than others at reading between the lines. One study by Hall of Northeastern University learned that the best judges were female, agreeable, conscientious, emotionally steady, thoughtful, intrigued by other people's lives, and big readers, particularly of fiction. Judgments of character can come from the thinnest of pieces. Even just an email address. What's thinner than an email address? Punctuation. A research study found that mad and happy-seeming emails have many exclamation points and few question marks. And feminine-seeming emails have both. Other work discovered that smileys in official emails do not make the author appear warm, but do make him or her appear incompetent. In the meantime, adding a smiley with a nose to a dating profile will win you more replies, while adding a noseless smiley will get you less. RRB, to think your future might depend on an emoji. Neither head nor heart can make it through by itself. And negotiating their symbiosis is a difficulty that is much harder than mastering chess or Go. It's not about whether intuition or analysis is best, Sadler-Smith tells supervisors. The real skill in decision-making, problem-solving, creativity, whatever, is mixing those two things together. And in a way, that is sort of a lifetime project, isn't it? Chapter 2. A Mother's Intuition. Would not it be good if we immediately knew the best way to raise our kids? Are some women geared up with the innate responses that help them be good parents? If you feel like you don't have mom's intuition, is there anything you can do to develop it? The terms maternal instinct and mom's intuition are usually used interchangeably, but I think it's essential to compare them. Maternal instinct implies a naturally based, inborn knowledge that tells us how to parent. I do not know of any proof of this in people. Human relationships are so complicated and so different across different civilizations and different people. I can't even picture what a universal human maternal impulse would look like. You don't parent exactly the same way your neighbor or perhaps your sister does. And if you have more than one child, there are most likely subtle and not so subtle distinctions in how you respond to each of them, because they're different people. On the other hand, intuition, which involves fast, holistic, affect-laden judgments, suspicions, that happen without conscious or deliberate weighing of facts, has been well documented by research. Julie Gore and Eugene Sadler-Smith at the University of Surrey, UK, define 4 primary kinds of intuition: problem-solving intuitions, social instincts, ethical intuitions, and creative instincts. Let's see how these might be appropriate to parenting. 1. Problem-solving intuition. You are the professional on your child. No one knows your child better than you do, and the proficiency that you've gotten from spending lots and lots of time with your kid can translate into suspicions about how to respond in certain circumstances. Research involving firefighters, neonatal nurses, and rocket battery leaders shows that these experts learn to measure a scenario quickly and know intuitively how to respond in crisis circumstances. For parents or caretakers, problem-solving intuition is the coalescing of all of our experiences with our kids. What has or has not worked in the past, how we envision they'd react, familiar patterns of engaging, into an automatic sense of knowing what to do. Somebody who knows your kid less well than you do wouldn't have this intuition. 2. Social intuition. Based on our past experiences and relationships, we can end up being good at reading people. When we connect with others, we automatically view their verbal and nonverbal cues, colored by our own existing or past experiences. And bundle all this into an impression of what they're thinking or how they are feeling. As parents, we do this all the time. Children do not normally announce things like, Mother, I'm feeling a little overloaded by what's going on at nursery school. I like the toys, but it's hard for me to control my desire to grab everything for myself. Stephanie is good, and it is fun to play with her, but it takes a lot of cognitive and psychological effort to collaborate our activities. And now I'm just plumb faded. Instead, we intuit when our children have reached the end of their rope, and we say something like, let's have some quiet time reading on the sofa, or let's go play on the swings. 3. Creative intuition. This sort of intuition includes gaining a new insight by following a hunch that something new or different might work. It involves integrating knowledge in new ways. Imaginative intuition typically involves a pre-collating stage that leads up to the creative advancement. Maybe you have had a difficult situation that turned up again and again. Bedtime dawdling or arguing about who sits where in the automobile. But then you unexpectedly had an intense area of how to handle it differently. You weren't sitting and purposely thinking of, how can I do this differently? The idea just came to mind. This burst of motivation about how to change a pattern is creative intuition. 4. Moral intuition. This sort of intuition involves our suspicions about what's right or wrong. If you have thought, that just doesn't feel right to me, or in other words, about co-sleeping or about crying it out, you're depending on ethical intuition. You can most likely come up with reasons to validate the choice, but what happens afterwards? The preliminary reaction was an instant instinctual knowing. Broken down this way, mother's or father's intuition doesn't seem so strange. It is based on our knowledge about our children, ourselves, and our families. The better we know our kids, the more experience we've had making parenting decisions or gaining from them, the more we can develop our instincts. Does this mean we should listen to our guts to know how to parent? Yes. Intuition is a rapid pulling together of what we know into a feeling about what's going on or what we should do. But we also really need to remember that intuition isn't necessarily precise. When we go with our gut, we might overlook important information. We might leap to conclusions based upon impressions of surface similarity. This could be when our children argue. We may too easily leap to defend our more youthful kid because we remember being teased by our older sister or brother and be blind to the kid's role in the dispute. Our best bet as parents or caregivers is to integrate our intuition with more deliberate thinking and learning. We want to understand our suspicions, but also deliberately weigh them along with reasoning and facts. Intuition draws from experience. As long as our experience is relevant, our intuition matters. The problem is that children grow and change. So in some cases, as parents, we get stuck into an old view of our children that is no longer appropriate. If you have ever grumbled that your parents or caregivers still treat you like you're 11, that could be just because they are depending on out-of-date intuition about how to react to you. Somehow you still feel 11 to them, even though they know you're older. As parents, we need to make a point of deliberately attempting to see our children as they are now, in addition to counting on our experience-based inklings. Chapter 3. The key role of intuition in students' choices. I believe staff, professors, companies, and parents or caretakers must help students concentrate on finding areas of intuition when it comes to picking jobs and profession paths. Consider this fact. Each human, regardless of IQ or talent, has natural areas of personal intuition. They're typically subjects that, when they turn up, cause something to happen inside. Something like The student is stimulated by the subject. The student has natural insights on how to navigate it. The student feels comfortable in this arena. The student is most confident when this problem occurs. The student wants to explore it and discover more. The student is most prominent when talking about this area. We have all met students who look like misfits amongst their peers, often just because they do not fit the typical mold of a student. Then, unexpectedly, they find that they really love electronics, or they discover how much they've drawn to horses, or cooking, you name it. Practically quickly, that young adult is changed. And much of the change involves self-respect and aspiration. What's happened? They found an area of natural intuition. It's a future predictor. Chapter 4. The Powers and Perils of Intuition. As a sign in Albert Einstein's office is reported to have read, "Not every little thing that can be counted counts, and not everything that counts can be counted." But from science and everyday life, I know that my intuition, an uncomplicated instant, unreasoned sense of truth, at times errs. My gut tells me that Reno is east of Los Angeles, and that Atlanta is east of Detroit, but I'm wrong. The first principle, said Einstein's fellow physicist, Richard Feynman, is that you must not trick yourself, and you are the easiest individual to deceive. There's also the quandary of mining untapped instinctive powers. When hiring, shooting, and investing, should we plug into our right brain premonitions? Or with bright people so frequently believing demonstrably dumb things, do we instead really need more left brain rationality? Here, I present psychology's assessment of intuition's powers and dangers. Consider the value of intuition to a judge or a juror finding out the fates of people, a financier affecting fortunes, or a clinician identifying a customer's suicidality. Intuitions from our anxieties, impressions, and relationships. They impact the president's judgments, a gambler's bets, and a worker's director's hiring decisions. Our gut-level instincts have helped us all avoid and sometimes allowed misfortunes. "Nobody can dictate my conduct," said Diana, Princess of Wales, in her last interview before her fatal accident. "I resolve instinct, and instinct is my best therapist." The powers. Prince Charles once said, "Buried deep within every one of us, there is an instinctive, wholehearted conscientiousness that provides, if we allow it to, the most trustworthy guide as to whether or not our actions are truly in the long-term interests of our world and all of the life it supports. We need," he continued, "to listen more to the sound judgment originating from our hearts." In this postmodernist new age, Prince Charles has a lot of company. Writers, therapists, and speakers galore offer to develop our sixth sense, harness our inner wisdom, and unlock our subconscious mind. Books guide us to instinctive healing, learning, spirituality, investing, and managing. Deciding what to make from this new home market is challenging. Intuitives, intuition authors, and trainers appear mainly oblivious to new clinical explorations of how the human mind processes information. Are their instincts about intuition legitimate? Conscientiousness is, in some cases, gotten into by unwelcome truth. There to see if we detest it from rational thinking and instead listen to the small voices within. Or are intuitives works to cognitive science with professional wrestling is to sports? Today, cognitive science is exposing an interesting unconscious mind that Freud never told us about. Thinking occurs not on stage, but unofficial, out of sight. Research studies of automated processing, subliminal priming, implied memory, heuristics, right brain processing, instantaneous feelings, nonverbal communication, and creativity reveal our instinctive capabilities. Thinking memory and mindset operate on two levels, the conscious and deliberate, and the unconscious, automatic. Dual processing scientists call it. We know more than we know we know. This idea that much of our daily thinking, feeling, and acting runs outside mindful awareness is a tough one to accept, reports psychologist John Bargh, Ph.D. of New York University, NYU, and Tanya Chartrand, Ph.D. of Ohio State University. Our awareness is prejudiced to believe that its own intense and deliberate choices rule our lives, but conscientiousness overrates its own control. Take something as basic as speaking. Strings of words effortlessly spill out of our mouths with near-perfect syntax. It is as if there were servants upstairs, busily hammering together sentences that get ripped down and fluidly shoved out of your mouth. Even as I type this paragraph, my fingers gallop across the keyboard under guidelines from someplace. And if a person enters my office while I'm typing, the cognitive servants running my fingers will end up the sentence while I start the conversation. We have, it seems, two minds, one for temporary awareness and the other for everything else. Reading thin slices. Do you ever find yourself sizing up someone immediately? Noting their animation, gestures, and manners of speaking, these thin pieces of somebody's behavior can expose much and from long-lasting impressions. Harvard psychology teachers Nalini Ambady, Ph.D., and Robert Rosenthal, Ph.D., found as much after videotaping fellow instructors. Observers viewed 3 thin slices of each professor's conduct. 10-second clips from the start, middle, and end of a class. And after that, ranked the teacher's confidence, energy, and warmth. They discovered that these ratings forecasted with amazing precision the average student ranking taken at the semester's end. Thinner pieces, 3 2-second clips, also yielded ratings similarly in agreement with student evaluations. Even micro-thin pieces tell us something. When Bargh flashes an image for just 0.2 of a second, his NYU students react to it instantly. We're finding that everything is assessed as good or bad within a quarter of a second, he says. So before taking part in logical thought, we might find ourselves either loathing or loving a piece of art or our new next-door neighbor. There is ancient natural knowledge to this express link between perception and response. When meeting a stranger in the forest, one needed to quickly decide, good friend or opponent. Those who could read an individual quickly and properly were more likely to make it through and leave descendants, which helps explain why people today can distinguish at a glance between facial expressions of anger, sadness, fear, or pleasure. Certainly, thanks to emotional paths that range from the eye to the brain's psychological nerve center, bypassing the cortex, we typically respond mentally before we have ever had time to translate purposefully. Beneath the radar of conscientiousness, we can process threatening information in milliseconds. After the cortex has had time to analyze the hazard, the thinking brain asserts itself. In the forest, we physically leap at the sound of rustling leaves, leaving the cortex to decide later if the sound originated from a predator or the wind. Clearly, human intelligence is more than reasoning, and understanding is more than consciousness. Psychologist George Miller highlighted his truth using a conversation between 2 ship guests. "There sure is a lot of water in the ocean," said one. "Yes," answered his friend, "and we've only seen the top of it." Women and men's intuitions. When Jackie Larson and her Grand Marais, Minnesota church group one early morning in April 2001, she encountered Christopher Bono, a clean-cut, well-mannered youth whose vehicle had broken down. Larson suggested he use the telephone at her shop to require assistance, but when Bono later appeared, she felt a pain in her stomach, sensing that something was wrong. She insisted they talk outside. "I can tell by your manners that you have a nice mom," Larson said. Bono's eyes repaired on her. "I don't know where my mom is," he responded. Larson delicately ended the discussion, directed Bono back to the church, and then called the authorities and suggested they trace his license plate. Bono's car was registered to Lucia Bono, his mom, in Illinois. When police found Lucia dead in her bathtub, Christopher Bono, 16, was charged with first-degree murder. Was it a coincidence that Jackie Larson doubted Bono's calm exterior? Or was it a woman's intuition, which so many believe is superior to men's? When surveyed, women are more likely to define themselves as compassionate than to guys. The sex gap in empathy also reaches behavior, though to a lesser degree. An example would be the following. Women are more likely to weep at another's distress, and the gap helps explain why both genders report that their friendships with women are more intimate, satisfying, and nurturing than their relationships with men. When seeking understanding, both women and men typically turn to women. One explanation for this is women's seemingly superior skill at reading others' feelings. In an analysis of 125 research studies on sensitivity, Judith Hall, Ph.D., of Northeastern University psychology professor, discerned that women typically exceed guys at deciphering emotional messages. When revealed a quiet 2-second movie clip of a woman who seems upset, women guessed more properly that she was discussing her divorce instead of criticizing a person. Women's nonverbal sensitivity also provides the edge in funding lies. Research suggests they exceed men in critical whether a male-female couple is truly romantic or a positioned fake couple. This gender gap can be easily overstated. Some guys are more empathetic and sensitive than the typical woman, but it generally appears real and is celebrated by some feminists as one of women's ways of understanding. Females more regularly base knowledge on intuitive and personal grounds. More than half of today's intuition books are authored by women. By comparison, in the Science and the Paranormal area of 2001, Prometheus Books brochure, only 4 of 110 authors were female. Psychologists discuss whether the intuition space is truly intrinsic to gender. Whatever the reason, Western custom has traditionally seen logical thinking as manly and intuition as womanly. Notes feminist historian Evelyn Fox Keller. Women's ways of knowing, argues feminist writer Mary Field Belinkie, give greater latitude to subjective knowledge. She competes that women winnow contending ideas less through hostile examination than by entering another's mind, and typically by way of friendly discussion. Some personality tests show that nearly 6 in 10 guys score as thinkers, saying to make decisions objectively, using logic, while 3 in 4 women score as feelers, saying to make decisions subjectively based on what they feel is right. The perils. It holds true. Intuition is a big part of human decision-making. But the complementary truth is that intuition usually errs. In July 2002, a Russian airliner's computer guidance system instructed its pilot to ascend as another jet approached in the sky over Switzerland. At the same time, a Swiss air traffic controller, whose digital system was down, offered a human judgment: descend. Faced with conflicting guidance, the pilot's intuitive reaction was to rely on another human's intuition. Tragically, the 2 aircrafts collided midair, killing everyone on board. The history of science tells story after story of challenges to human intuition. Our forefathers, the sun's day-to-night travels, had at least 2 believable explanations. Either the sun was circling around the Earth, or Earth was spinning while the sun stalled. Intuition preferred the first clarification. Galileo's scientific observations demanded the second. Psychology, too, is loaded with compelling examples of how people trick themselves. Even the most smart people make foreseeable and costly instinctive mistakes. Coaches, sports players, investors, job interviewers, bettors, and psychics fall victim to well-documented illusory intuitions. It is stunning how vulnerable we are to forming false memory syndromes, misjudging reality, and mispredicting our own conduct. Our intuition errs. Research studies suggest, for instance, that people mispredict the toughness and strength of their feelings after a romantic breakup, losing an election, winning a game, and being insulted. Harvard psychologist Daniel Gilbert, Ph.D., and his coworkers have studied at length our ability to effectively forecast. They've learned that while many people facing an individual catastrophe expect psychological wounds to be enduring, such expectations are usually wrong. Take hungry consumers, for instance, who purchase more impulsively than those who shop after dinner. When hungry, we mispredict how gross fried donuts will appear when we're full. When satiated, however, we mispredict how delicious that late-night donut might be. Various other studies have discovered that people tend to overstate how much their well-being would be impacted by warmer winter seasons, relocations, football triumphs, dropping weight, and having more downtime. Even extreme events, winning the lotto or suffering a paralyzing accident, impact long-term joy to a lower degree than most people suppose. Our intuitive concept appears to be, we want, we get, we are really happy. If true, this short article would be much shorter. In reality, note Gilbert and his associate Timothy Wilson, Ph.D., of the University of Virginia, we usually miswant. People who imagine a vacation on a deserted tropical island could be dissatisfied when they see how much they require everyday structure, intellectual stimulus, or regular infusions of Pop-Tarts. Our intuition tells us that if our wanted prospect or team wins, we will be pleased for a long while. But studies consistently expose that emotional traces of good tidings vaporize more quickly than we'd expect. It wants negative events that we are particularly susceptible to misintuiting the resilience of our feelings. Many people being tested for HIV expect to feel suffering over bad news and elation over good news for weeks after hearing the results. And yet, just 5 weeks later, the receivers of bad news are less distraught, and the receivers of good news are less elated than they initially anticipated. This occurs because people overlook the speed and power of their mental body immune system, say Gilbert and Wilson. That includes strategies for justifying, marking down, forgiving, and restricting trauma. Being mainly oblivious of this emotional recovery system, we accommodate diseases, disabilities, romantic separations, and beats more readily than we intuitively expect. Weeping may tarry for the night, but joy comes in the early morning, reflect the psalmist. Intuition is bigger than we understand. It feeds our expertise, creative skill, love, and spirituality. It's a wonder. Still, it is also dangerous. Today's cognitive science aims not to ruin intuition, but to strengthen it, to sharpen our thinking and deepen our knowledge. Researchers who expose intuition's defects remember that it works well in some areas, but needs restraints and checks in others. In worlds from sports to business to spirituality, we now understand how perilous intuitions often go before a fall, and how we can, for that reason, think smarter, even while listening to that creative whispers of our hidden mind. This has been Intuition, the Power and Role of Our Natural Instincts, written by Celestia Copps, read for you by Chloe Jacobson. Copyright 2020 by Celestia Copps. Production copyright by Celestia Copps.